welcome to the 905 podcast. My name's Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And this week we've got a roundup episode. There's a whole bunch of stories that we've been wanting to cover for a few weeks that we thought we really need to do a sort of catch up and try and hit a whole bunch in one go. And but before we do that, I just want to say a quick thank you to all our patrons who've been generously contributing, whether previously in previous years, earlier this year, but especially after we've been doing our kind of end of year patron drive, reminding everybody why they might like to contribute to the 905. We really appreciate the support. It's been really an excellent response, phenomenal response, and we appreciate everybody who supports us. If you'd like to be one of those people, just go to our website at the905.ca, and it keeps us going. It helps us keep the lights on. and the computers connected to the internet, and it really means a lot to us that people are willing to support us in that way. So thank you everybody who's contributed. But now back to the news, and we're going to start off with a story that just came out yesterday and today, and it's about Jackson Square in Hamilton. And well, basically, the big development that's supposed to be happening there is not happening anytime soon. So Hamilton will get to look at an empty Jackson Square for the foreseeable future. And this, well, really, Joel, it's not just a Hamilton story. This says something about the property market and about how development happens in this province as ever.
Well, that's the thing, is that the story goes, the developer who bought the city center, Hamilton City Center, and then really kind of, pushed all the remaining businesses that were there, kind of, all right, get out because we're going to need to start construction, has said it's no longer financially viable for them to tear it down and build the 4-tower project that they were initially going to planning for. And yeah, I mean, this is something that you and I have talked about many, many, many times on this podcast. And this isn't a Hamilton-centric story. This happens repeatedly around the 905 of developers who buy land and then say, push for the approval of whatever it is that they want to build there, the townhomes, the condo towers, the whatever, and then sit on it because it's not a financially viable project to engage in. And we understand there's inflation. There is they're waiting for pricing or the market rates to come down so it's easier to borrow money and whatnot. But it's kind of emblematic of the problems in our inherent system of building housing and relying on private developers to build the needed housing that's needed right now. I mean, technically it was needed last year, not right now, or not next year, or not 2 years when it's market viable. It's needed now. And it's kind of like, well, how do we square that away? Like, because I understand the developer needs to make a buck. They have a responsibility to their employees, to themselves. They have a fiduciary responsibility, and I'm not neglecting that. I'm not saying that needs to be overlooked. But clearly, there is a driving need in the market, or in the social, especially in downtown Hamilton. I mean, we just need development in downtown Hamilton. How, what's going on here? How do we square this square peg into a round hole?
Yeah, this is the perennial problem with how development gets done in this province. And it's because of the connection between land development and land speculation. Now, I'm not saying that the developer in this case is anything other than 100% honest about the reason that they are pausing development. I'm not saying that. Doesn't really need no ulterior motive is required. However, no developer wants to, and often is able to develop, unless the market is at its peak in demand. So, and also because they have to, as a business, maximize their profits. So huge amounts of land. We've spoken about it again and again. There are huge numbers. I can't remember the exact numbers, but endless approvals in the pockets of developers in this province that are not being developed and that are just sitting there waiting for the right moment to happen. And rather than ever talking about that fact, uh, all the attention, both increasingly at a federal level as well as the provincial level, is about, well, these municipalities are stopping development. Well, Hamilton's not stopping anything here. Hamilton would do anything to get an empty shopping mall replaced with something far better.
Four
Um,
towers.
well, yeah, I mean it's
Yeah.
like 2,000 units or something like that. Yeah, and that's a lot of housing. Um, now, well, I mean, if you're going to have residential towers, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of just tower blocks, but if you're going to have towers, then downtowns are the place to have them. And Hamilton already has towers. I mean, like I say, I could always think of preferable modes of building, but I'm not going to say it's you know whatever. What we can certainly all agree on is that an empty shopping mall, which is not the most attractive place at the best of times, it is not what we need right now in Hamilton. Yeah, it's tragic, but it's emblematic of just everything that happens. The building will come in time, but goodness knows when. The
But
uh,
the problem is like it's needed now. It's not,
mhm,
and that's the problem we have with development in the province, 905 province, and dare I say it, I guess across the country is that the private sector builds at its own schedule, as it kind of should. I mean, it does have a right to, like, the developer has a right to make a buck off of this project. That's their business. That's how capitalism works. But we're seeing as the fault of capitalism is that this doesn't work, and that's why I've said we need more affordable housing. We need government, whether it's the province or the feds, to come in and start building cheap, market friendly, market ready, good housing for low income or fixed income families to be housed in. And the reason why is, now that's not going to solve all of it. It's not possible. But what it does do is that it creates a demand and a competitive edge that people say, well, not everybody's competing for the condo towers or for the latest private sector housing. They say, well, I have options now. I can go into a subsidized unit. That's good. It's clean. It's affordable. It's safe. And that relieves the pressure, and they maybe creates, dare I say it, competition in the market that maybe it could start, lighting a fire on these developers. Say, yeah, there's an incentive now. I need to get this project done because I need to get this off my books. I need to make the profit that I can from it and move on to the next project. And because waiting for the Bank of Canada uh, uh, to bring down rates back to where they were pre-pandemic, that's not a safe. That's not going to be a viable option. That quite frankly, I don't think that's ever going to happen. But say we'll wait for the Bank of Canada to bring down rates to, less than 1% interest rates. That's going to be a long way before the private sector then says, okay, now I can borrow money to build my projects. We need to start rethinking this. And that's kind of where I always look more to the federal scene, where you have folks like Pierre Poilievre say, oh, no, it's the municipalities. The municipalities don't cut the red tape. Malarkey. It's not the municipality's fault. Like, we need major investment by the ones who have the power, meaning the federal government, into just building cheap, affordable housing. This isn't to say that Justin Trudeau has solved the problem, because Lord knows I think we can do more there. But just saying, oh no, it's the like you said earlier, Roland, it's the municipalities. They're the fault. That is such a red herring. It is such malarkey. It is not the problem here.
well, yeah. I mean, actually, let's look at that. So I mean, so Hamilton, along with every city, almost every city apart from Newmarket, signed up to these targets. And we spoke to Mayor John Taylor a couple of weeks ago about this, and he was like, this is why I wouldn't sign up. And so, Hamilton has signed up to get so many things developed. Well, those 2,000 units will have been part of that sort of target, so to speak, that they need to hit. Well, the city has no control over
Mhm.
this. All they can do is issue the developer came to them and said, I want to build 2,000 units downtown. City said, awesome. Thanks very much. Uh, Off you go then. Get cracking. And then a year after the development was literally meant to actually start, just after the holidays last year, um, the developer says, "Oh well, actually, the market, we're not going to be doing this anytime soon. So just look at, you're just going to have to suck that up." Again, I'm not necessarily, in this particular instance, I'm not criticizing the developer. I don't know enough about it, but you know, I mean, any development of that scale, so many units have to be sold before they actually have the money to build the thing. Um, so that's part of the story too.
Well,
But ultimately, it's like, well, if we wait 2 years, 3 years, we're going to get a much better price,
right.
and the costs will not have gone up proportionally to what we get in terms of market price. So the motivation for developers is always to like, well, can we get a better price in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time? Because if it's 5 years, that's just fine in the context of development. If you're talking about millions and millions of dollars.
But again, it comes down to we don't need it 5 years from now. We need it now.
Mhm.
And that's, again, it's that how do you balance these two conflicting
And I think
conflicting, I would argue, very justifiable needs. That's how it goes. But I think what we come down to is the notion of, oh, it's these dastardly municipalities that are blocking development. I say, there's right here. No, this isn't the case. Like we've never seen a case where a municipality has flat out stopped a development, maybe delayed it, maybe mucked it up a bit, but flat out stopped a development approval from going through. Never. It's never happened. I invite any of our listeners to do the deep dive
they
that
legally
may,
can't. They legally
right.
can't. I mean, the least they can ever do is allow the developer the as of right zoning for that piece of land. That's the minimum. And then, if they say, okay, you've come forward with a proposal, it's zoned for 14, you've asked for 30, which would not be the kind of request that was out of line. Well, that just goes to the LPAT, and in a case like that, the LPAT, the Ontario, whatever the hell it's called,
Yeah, yeah.
got
Ontario
mental
Land
blank,
Tribunal.
such a mental blank over the name of that thing. It's the trauma people. It's the trauma of all the different acronyms that thing's had. Um, they will undoubtedly, in a case like that, say, "Well, okay, you asked for 30, you can have 28 or 29."
Right.
uh, so the most a city can do is delay. The most it can do is delay. Um, and in the context of how long development takes, they can't even delay for that long, to be honest.
Yep.
Municipalities are just not the freaking problem. They're not. Um, the if you want to look at sheer acres of land that are ready to be developed that are not being developed, it's all because it's in the pockets of developers and they don't want to develop it. That's the only freaking reason.
But but I think that might be a good, maybe somewhat awkward segue into the next aspect of this episode we want to talk about, and that was kind of the culture at city halls. And that while city halls are essentially powerless to develop or to prevent development from really going forward, they are really good at protecting their own. And that seems to be where city halls' energies tend to be focused on, is looking after each other's back. And no greater example of that was a story that we've been wanting to cover for a while, but haven't gotten around to it. But that's the Red Hill Valley Parkway scandal that happened in Hamilton. And for listeners who are not in Hamilton, who don't know, the Red Hill Valley was a parkway that was completed a while back, and a number of accidents happened on it in Hamilton. It was connecting the Lincoln Alexander Parkway down to the QEW, and a number of traffic fatalities happen on that parkway to the point where people said, "What's going on?" It seems that the curves on the parkway were very slippery, and it led to collisions. Well, after a while, it turns out that the city knew for a while that it was made. The parkway itself was made with some faulty materials, not really up to code, which contributed to these accidents. Now, rather than the city owning up to the scandal, to the mistake, to the shortcomings, they essentially tried to bury the report to save the necks, the butts of city staff.
Yeah, and we should maybe just qualify that slightly and say that the members of staff of a particular department covered up the report,
Yes.
and when the city discovered, the wider city whole discovered years later what was going on, they then initiated the inquiry. So it's not the entire city that was covering up. It's not councillors that were covering up. It was a department and particular director, uh, basically Gary Moore, director of engineering services, is the person who the inquiry has pointed at, um, who covered it up. Nevertheless, one individual, a couple of individuals, whatever. Um, it says something important about city halls, and I think that's what we want to kind
Yeah.
of look at here. Well, yeah, I mean, so the inquiry, this came out a couple of weeks ago, so for people in Hamilton, it's kind of old news now to an extent. But we really wanted to, we didn't have sort of time to fit it into the schedule. We really wanted to at least give an important kind of nod in the direction of this story because to an extent it's gone by unnoticed, and it was a big deal. The report, the inquiry and the story behind this was an important factor in the last election in Hamilton. Now the report's actually come out. It was almost like the report itself kind of went by without a huge amount of comment. But I mean, the report came out with what everybody expected it to come out with, which was that there was sort of major systemic problems here. There were major design flaws in the road itself, including overly tight corners, wrong kind of asphalt on the highway. It was too slippery, had lower grip than it should have had, and that resulted in hundreds of collisions in which several people were killed between 2008 and 2019. 11 years. Um, the first report was requested by the city itself in 2013, and that report in 2013 basically said, "You've got a problem here. This needs to be fixed." And that was the report that was buried by the director of engineering services who requested the report and who kept the findings under wraps for the 6 subsequent years. As a result of which, several people were killed who would otherwise have been alive. Um,
Well,
and
that's
it's just give the numbers here. I'm just reading from the CBC, but 862 collisions between 2013, so when the first report happened, and 2017, um, including deaths of one, two, at least four people, all fairly young, 18, 19 years old. Um, so, an absolutely tragic situation. And, you know, the specifics relate to particular people. But, my feeling was looking at the story and looking at the report is it's a very familiar story of departmental defensiveness, protectionism, of kind of this is the culture that you see at city halls if you spend any great amount of time at them. And we've looked at quite a few now, um, I always kind of joke, Joey Coleman's a great friend of the podcast, a great, really good journalist. I mean, a great journalist. And he looks at Hamilton and I think, the temptation always is to say, Hamilton's a particularly bad example. It's like, I don't think it is. I think Hamilton's entirely typical of how city halls work in Ontario. You look at any city hall for a particularly long time, you'll find the same stuff. And it's toxic atmospheres, not just amongst the political employees, but amongst the people who work there all the time.
Hmm.
My experience was of just you know any attempt at change, any attempt at innovation, any suggestions were met with like the fiercest kind of wall of defensiveness of like get off our land, get off our turf, keep away. And this is the kind of thing that comes out of those kind of mentalities.
But
It, it,
the question that I think for a lot of our listeners say, well, where's the accountability to council? The report, like again, I think people think of a council as like a mini parliament, right? Is that, oh, I've elected this council, they're accountable to me, and my councilor, you know, voices my concerns about my neighborhood, my neck of the woods to council, and they enact policy to make where I live better. And it doesn't work that way. The because I think most people would think, okay, a report was commissioned. It should have been presented to council, and council reads and says, "Oh my gosh, we need to make these actions. Let's put the money into repairing the road or whatever." And that doesn't happen because I don't think council can just go and say, "Hey, where's that report we asked for? We asked for it at the end of the month. Where is it?" Call that doesn't happen. There is no body that sits there and says, "Hey, Gary, where's the report we asked for?" Or you get time and then a new council comes in and it gets lost in the shuffle and nobody knows about it again. There's no carryover to the next council say, "Hey, we have these outstanding items that need to be addressed. What do you want to do with it?" And maybe you do, but that's entirely dependent on staff. And that's where, again, that accountability comes into play here. Uh, and it kind of maybe bring the conversation a bit full circle, you know, decrying about focusing on stuff with municipalities that they can't change. Vis-a-vis development, what it takes away from the real discussions about real municipal reform that needs to take place to give honestly councils, mayors and councils more authority over the employees to say, you're not accountable to the people. The elected people are. The elected ones are accountable. They need to, and ultimately these people do work for you and I, the citizens, the taxpayers, the ones who do pay their salary. Say you work for us, and when we have questions about our roadways being our roadways safe, answers shouldn't be left at the bottom of an out pile on somebody's desk.
yeah, and I think I mean just looking at the report's findings on the individual Mr. Moore, who was kind of ultimately behind this tragedy and behind this whole thing. Um, you know, I'll just read a quote from the report here. Mr. Moore expressed these views aggressively at times to staff, including challenging the utility or need for traffic safety countermeasures. Basically, the attitude, which is remarkably kind of stupid, that well, if drivers drive too fast, it's their fault if they die. Um, Things are designed because we have to design things because people are imperfect. People will drive too fast. Some people will drive badly. Some people are inexperienced drivers. It's probably
Mhm.
no coincidence that some of the people killed here were young because they haven't got the experience now, I'm not saying I don't know about the specifics, no idea. But, I know when I was young, I didn't drive with the kind of utility that I do now with the
Hands were
experience.
not always at 10 and 2. Is that it?
They're probably not always at 10 and 2 now either, but you get that kind of, that sixth sense
Yeah.
of how traffic is and the feel of the car on the road and you know what it's like when you're driving on ice or on a slippery surface,
Yep. Yep.
all these kind of things. So you design things for that situation that we live in an imperfect world. You don't you know aeroplanes are actually like jet airplanes are a fantastic example of how you can design things where no accident is can ever be acceptable because just driver error is going to end up with hundreds of deaths. And like if we designed our cars the way we design planes, it would be a very different world, that's for sure. So, that's almost a separate issue there. But it's that culture of kind of arrogance within city halls that I've certainly seen with my own eyes. And I've certainly spoken to many elected
Yeah.
officials over the years. I've spoken about, there are not, and I want to stress at this point, vast majority of city hall staff I've ever dealt with, spoken to, were lovely people, very professional, very well intentioned. Um, so I don't want to, give the wrong impression. However, there is certainly an element within city halls, and because of the traditional, so-called weak mayor, so-called what I would call weak council arrangements that we have, staff will keep stuff away from the elected people, and well, some staff will keep stuff away from, and will, really, as far as possible, say it's our job to decide what goes on here.
Mhm.
Screw the elected folk. And it's a system that encourages that point of view, if we're completely honest. So, I wish that the strong mayor powers, so-called strong mayor powers, have been brought in, were a lot more. It was a proper strong council system,
Well,
properly thought about, properly studied and considered for years on end, not just sort of brought in on the back of an envelope by Doug Ford, that readjusted the power balance between staff and council, so that I don't think that's what we've got. I don't think what we actually received was anything like that. But I think that could only help with that accountability, with making sure people know where they stand in the pecking order of things.
why don't we take a break there for our sponsor, and we'll be back with our last bit for the episode.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.
Okay, so to wrap up, we're going to look at Burlington's latest budget, and again, it's not because we're picking on Burlington, but a bit of what we see as an emblematic problem across all municipalities, and that is we're still doing things the same way that we've always done things. I think the general consensus and it's something, if you listen to this podcast for a while, you've known change is needed, not just governance, but the way that we do things. That being said, in the last 2024 budget with Burlington, this was brought to our attention by Safe Streets Halton, is that there's no effort to change the way we get around in our cities. We still build our cities like we expect it to be a 1950s suburban utopia of, okay, I can get in my car and do a 15-minute drive down to the store, the shop, whatever, pick up what I need, and I'm back in half an hour. And let's face it, folks, you and I both know that that's not the reality on the ground. You get anywhere in a city of a moderate size, such as Burlington, Oakville, Newmarket, Markham, it takes you a while to get around because there's just so much more of us around here. And for decades, advocates have been asking for increased biking infrastructure, increased public transportation infrastructure, and just increased funding to public transit in general. And we're not seeing that in our municipal councils' budgets, especially in the fact that because of Bill 23 with the cutbacks on development fees, so cities are now forced to raise property taxes, which is happening across the board. But we're not seeing a change. We're not seeing a change in structure of, okay, we need to start investing in smarter ways to get around. And part of that is, I think, public transit. I don't see any other way to solve it. We just need more public transportation. And I underscore that because of I live in Burlington, and something that's happened twice now in the last 2 or 3 years now that's completely out of the control of Burlington City Council, mind you. We have three highways converging in our backyard here. When the Skyway shuts down due to accident, construction, whatever, the overflow of all that traffic filters into Burlington and the city becomes gridlocked and it's impossible to get around. And while that is a gross inconvenience for a lot of people, especially when it happens at uh, rush hour, it's dangerous because God forbid there's an emergency and we need first responders, emergency crews to get to a fire or a medical emergency or a crime that's happening, and they can't because they literally cannot move on major streets. It is a literally like it takes hours, 8 hours to get home. It's that bad. And there's nothing the city can do. Like they cannot they can't widen streets. They can't add more lanes. They can't order you to stay home. It's just not possible. What they can do is, I think, invest in better public transit infrastructure. They can invest in more European designs of roads where you might have dedicated public transit laneways that no one but public transit and first responder vehicles can use. The rest of us can't. And the idea is that we get around a lot faster, a lot easier, a lot simpler. But we're not seeing that kind of innovation from any municipality here in the 905. It's a lot of it is, let's just keep doing the same thing that we've been doing for the last 60, 70 years and hope that somehow it's going to become better tomorrow. It's not. We need to start getting away from the 1950s suburban mentality that kind of has been guiding the idea of like, we'll just keep feeding the sprawl, right? We'll just keep feeding the sprawl, and that's going to be the way that we grow our cities. We're not seeing that at all.
No, I mean, there's just cities. I mean, we see cities in Europe. Paris is always one that's held up as an example, doing really radical things. Just seizing the initiative on things like cycling infrastructure and also cities like Amsterdam. The cliche always is like, well, Canada's not like Amsterdam. We can't, we'll never be like that. They have a cycling culture. And then people show you the pictures of Amsterdam in the 1970s when they had car gridlock because there was no cycling infrastructure at that time. They built it. They spent decades and decades building it, and now they're reaping the rewards. I mean, to the extent that they actually now have bike traffic problems. But that's what can happen when municipalities have vision. And to be fair, when municipalities are given the power by the higher levels of government to be able to have vision and have the financial tools, the spending tools, the fundraising tools to actually do that. Now, so I think part of the problem, part of the criticism that I'm going to level at Burlington is not Burlington's fault. It's not, and when we're picking on Burlington, we're just using Burlington here as an exemplar. We haven't spoken about them for a while. I do think, having said that, the great promises of Marianne Mead Ward in her first term, this kind of dramatically different council, my God, it looks a hell of a lot like every other council that's ever existed in Burlington right now, in terms of what it's doing, in terms of the really, there were two significant things that we're just going to pick on here. We're not going to go into detail on the whole budget, but there was a discussion over spending for housing, for affordable housing, and that was voted down. It's just basically like too expensive, can't afford it, done. One councillor in favour there. There was talk about funding for a safety, a road safety officer, road safety coordinator position. So one member of staff to basically work specifically on road safety and reducing deaths. And remember, all these cities are all signed up to the Vision Zero. Zero means zero. It doesn't mean zero means 10 or 12. Um, uh, Two councillors in favour there, the rest against, and it's basically, well, we don't really need this. It's not really the lack of, even the most incremental, small, minor changes get voted down.
Mhm.
And it it's you know
The way that we constantly have done things in the past is no longer viable. We need to have councils, again, not just Burlington or Hamilton, but around the 905, who are willing to embrace change, who are willing to say, we're going to build the infrastructure needed to get around more efficiently, more fast. The idea of just like, we can't add more roads. That's the thing. Like, you can't just say, oh, we'll just widen the roads and add another laneway. No, we need to give people a viable option to not take their car everywhere. Perfect example, I had a conversation with somebody. We met up for a coffee, not too far from where I live, and we were talking about how it's the distance of everything is just so far out of the way. Yeah, we have to drive to where we want to go to meet up because the public transit option is just not there. It's not reliable. It's not a good substitute. And we question, like, why couldn't we just, for a moderate fee, a reliable bus service on a major roadway too? It's not as if we were at some out of the way side street. This is a major road. I said, why didn't we not just invest in a express route just up and down the road and just say, no, the idea is like, you get where you need to go in 15 minutes, right? It's just dedicated infrastructure. And I would invite you to look at, you're right, Roland, like cities like Amsterdam that have just said, no, the idea, like, is the idea of like, oh, we need great big wide boulevards full of cars because that's how we get around. Saying, no, we don't, because you don't actually transit that people. You just have a lot of people stuck in gridlock, stuck in parking lots on the roadways as you wait for the car in front of you to pull into a Walmart or into a subdivision or whatever have you. No, you need dedicated laneways of just public transit. It is for first responder vehicles, and just book it down these major roadways, which is what they initially were designed for. And that's,
okay,
we need
yeah,
councils that are going to take that
and
risk. Not at risk, just the vision to say we're going to make it happen.
and we're talking about things like bus lanes. Um, these are things that were put in place in cities around the world. Most of the certainly the Western world. I can't speak not just years ago, not recently. We're talking in the 1970s. This was done. People saw the need
Yeah.
to let the transit get through. And Canada's not just behind, it's decades and decades. I mean, the whole of North America, to be fair, it's not just Canada. For some reason, we have this cultural inability to look at what happens in the other world, in the rest of the world, and go, well, maybe that would work here. There was just such, the
Mhm.
car-centric mentality was so ingrained for so long. And it's starting to break down, but it's breaking down so slowly. I mean, frankly, I mean, it's infuriating. It's infuriating, but it's also, you know, we're heading towards environmental apocalypse. Um, and we're
I laugh, but you're
bitching
right.
about a couple of bus lanes at the same time. It's like,
I thought
what's the fucking point?
that's the thing. Like I know I love driving. I love cars. Like we've had on Flavio Volpe to talk about Project Arrow before, and I mean that guy's a car nut. Like he just loves cars, rightfully so. I mean that's his industry, that's his career, and I love it. I love the technology. I love driving. But you know what I like driving, honestly, is out on the highway, out on the road where you can actually drive, not do this bumper to bumper nonsense within cities. And like, here's the thing, we're never going to not need cars. We will always need cars. We'll always need stuff to just, yeah, I need to go to pick up groceries for, for the weekend. You'll need it. It's just the case. But do we need it for every little thing to say, well, I want to go to a meet up with a friend for a cup of coffee. I need to go down to City Hall to file paperwork, or to a Service Canada or Service Ontario office to run an errand. This stuff should be easier to do on a public transit system. It's not because, oh, public transit doesn't work. It doesn't work because we haven't invested in it. We don't actually put the money into it, say, let's improve it, let's make it better. And is it, I think it's just, it's not because of any lobbyists, it's not because of any conspiracy. I think it's just a lack of imagination to say, could it be better? Yeah, it could. We're going to try to make an effort to put it forward, and then sell the idea to the people. And because quite frankly, I say at the current system, I don't think it works. Like, the current system is failing us. The current system of developing our cities, and just the idea of we'll just keep building out sprawl, it's failing. I think people are starting to catch on with it. They start to see this isn't sustainable, and it's not a way to get around a city anymore.
And let's just talk. I mean, in the last few minutes, we didn't talk about this, but I mean, so listeners, I recently, for the last sort of 2 years, I basically personally experimented with living a 95% car-free life. And I moved to just about downtown Hamilton, just on the outskirts of the downtown, I guess, just near the mountain. It's pretty much a 15-minute community. I can pretty much do everything within 15 minutes, apart from get to a supermarket or a DIY store, or a bank, which are actually more important, those three things, than you might think. And I've just bought a car recently. And for most of that time, I could get by. But don't have friends in other cities if you live in Ontario, because if you don't have a car, you got a problem. Kind of, saying, well, why didn't you catch the GO train? No, not a solution. Certainly no bus solution. And just the sheer amount of time that would be involved with that kind of travel is not realistic. And I still don't drive very much. I now have a car that sits unused for probably 5 out of every 7 days. And I'm spending thousands and thousands of dollars for the privilege. But that, I guess, was worth it to me, to have that independence, flexibility. I'm still not going to feel too guilty about the pollution, comparing my pollution with the rest of the provinces. But it's it shows how even in a 15-minute community, and this is about as close to a 15-minute community as you could hope for, people are still going to pay a lot of money for the privilege of having a car. The qualifier to that is I when I needed a car, I would use Commune Auto, which is like Zipcar, based in Quebec. It's a great system, and you could use a Commune Auto car every day of the year, probably, and still save a ton of money over actually owning a car. However, getting hold of them is not easy enough. You can't just walk out your door and jump into a car quite. So even that, becomes a kind of inconvenience. So, we've got to genuinely get people to view driving in a different way. We've still got a hell of a long way to go. I really tried, but ultimately, I guess I failed. I mean, I don't really view it that way, but
No, we're never not going to drive anywhere, but getting around our cities should be a lot easier. There should be a great option just to hop on a bus for a 15-minute drive to go somewhere to meet up for a cup of coffee, to go see an event, go downtown to eat, drink, be merry, catch up with friends, that kind of stuff. You're going to need a car to get around and all that. But again, these are the the option of everybody has a right to get around. They should be able to use the car whenever they want. Is the arguments that are being made to prevent municipalities from investing in the necessary infrastructure to stop the sprawl, essentially.
Well, to make everything that little bit easier, and with every degree of ease, every change that you make is going to help a little bit. It's going to get a few people, if you live on the right bus route, you might now take the bus where previously you didn't. Change can be incremental, but we need a lot of increments. And you will see the change. I mean, you already see in Toronto, if you know people who live in central Toronto, the younger they are, the more likely it is that they won't have a car because they're not traveling to Hamilton to see friends. They're traveling just to another bit of downtown Toronto. It makes perfect sense. You jump on the subway. So many different ways of getting around in Toronto. You really can exist without a car, and you can save yourself a ton of money in the process. So yeah, I mean, but it's like again, you look at the cities. The 905 cities need the most change. They were designed badly. They were designed backwards. They were designed for cars. We need cities to go to hell with it. We're gonna be radical here. We're just gonna push this and push this and push this. We're not going to reconsider it every year and then undo what we did the year before. We're going to follow a plan for decades on end, and we're going to build that infrastructure. But that's not what we see. We see such modest piddling change when we see it at all.
A toe in the pond, and then when the water gets a little bit cold, it's a yank out. We run back to the comfort of sprawl and 3-car garages now.
I'm not. You know what? In the past, I probably would have thrown more shade at members of Burlington Council, specific ones, and I'm not even going to bother doing that anymore because I don't believe that they count. They might as well go home for all the good they're doing. It's not politicians; it's systemic. It's the way the whole thing is built from the ground up that is ultimately the problem. And there's no, the only way that's going to change is with a change of the provincial government, and I don't see it coming from any of the 3 or even the 4th major party. I mean, maybe the Greens would be different. I suspect by the time they won an election, they'd be pretty much just like the rest.
On that cheery note, I think maybe we just wrap this up and call it a day. It's been fun. I think we're gonna probably our next episode we're going to do a year-end Christmas party spectacular. So if you haven't already, sign up, subscribe, tune in next week. We'll round up the next year and then take a break and enjoy the holidays. So
bye, folks.
Bye-bye. That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.